Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a case that really, I think, captivated the nation, the Winger case.
Yeah.
And you guys have provided us with, quite a mix of sources here. Court
Yeah, a
transcripts,
lot of material.
investigative reports, wow, even some psychological analyses of some of the key players.
Mm.
So buckle up because this deep dive is going to take us through some twists and turns, deception, betrayal,
Oh, yeah.
and ultimately that quest for justice.
You know what's really interesting about this case to me is it makes you question how well you can really know anyone, even
Yeah.
even people who are very close to you,
Exactly.
and how these seemingly ordinary lives can just take these really dark turns.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what we're going to do is we're going to actually start with the trial itself. That
Yeah.
moment
Okay.
when the jury found Mark Winger guilty
Wow.
of murdering not only his wife Donna, but also Roger Harrington, the supposed intruder.
And then we're going to rewind. We're going to sort of peel back the layers of this whole story and try to figure out how this man who was presenting himself as a grieving husband ends up, behind bars.
It really is a powerful reminder that sometimes the truth is much more complicated than it might seem at first.
Absolutely. So let's rewind to August 1995, Springfield, Illinois.
Okay.
Picture, like the perfect life, Mark and Donna Winger, new baby girl.
The American dream.
Yeah, picture the American dream, right? But, behind this facade, there was a much darker reality.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, we find out, was having all kinds of financial problems, like deep financial trouble, debts, even some allegations of fraud.
And this financial pressure is something that we see in a lot of cases like this.
Yeah.
Can put a real strain on relationships. Sometimes it leads people to do things that they never thought they would do.
Yeah.
Investigators in this case actually found out that Mark had taken out a pretty big life insurance policy on Donna not long before she died. So right from the start, there's a possible motive. But of course, having a motive doesn't automatically make you a murderer.
Right.
So let's talk about the night that the crime happened.
Oh.
Home invasion, Donna's brutally attacked, and Mark ends up shooting the intruder, Roger Harrington. And at first it seemed like it was totally self-defense.
The crime scene, as you can imagine, was chaotic. There was blood, a hammer. Donna wasn't responding. Harrington was barely clinging to life. It was a horrible scene.
It sounds terrifying. And amidst all this chaos, something just didn't feel right to everybody. So enter Detective Williamson.
Right.
The investigator who he wasn't quite buying Mark's story. He just had this nagging feeling that something wasn't adding up.
It's really important for investigators to be able to balance their intuition with the actual evidence. Detective Williamson had to make sure that he wasn't letting his suspicions kind of get in the way of his judgment. He needed solid proof if he was going to challenge Mark's story.
Right, of course. So what specifically was making him doubt Mark's story?
Well, one of the things was that there was no sign of forced entry.
Okay.
If this was a random home invasion, you'd expect to see some signs of a break-in, right? But there wasn't any. And then there was this really mysterious note that they found in Harrington's van.
No.
And this note suggested that he had actually arranged to meet with Mark beforehand. And that completely contradicted what Mark had said about never having met Harrington before.
Right. That definitely changes things.
Yeah.
But even with all these doubts, the case actually remained closed for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
So what was it that finally changed and got it reopened?
A new witness came forward, someone whose testimony was so shocking that it forced the authorities to completely reopen the investigation.
Wow.
This wasn't just someone adding a few details. This was someone who completely changed the whole direction of the case.
It sounds like a big turning point. So we're going to hold off for just a second before revealing who this mystery witness is. But it's safe to say that their testimony shifted the focus away from Harrington as the aggressor and put Mark's past, his behavior before the attack, and his relationships under a very powerful microscope.
It definitely did.
We left off talking about how investigators were starting to see some cracks in Mark Winger's facade, like this darker side was starting to emerge. And they were really focusing on the financial pressure and these secrets he seemed to be keeping. And as they dug even deeper, they started to see this pattern of behavior that was pretty concerning.
Right. And remember those financial problems we talked about? Well, it turns out it wasn't just like he was passively struggling. The investigators found that Mark was actively engaging in some, questionable practices, like actually forging signatures to try and get loans and stuff. This wasn't just bad luck, it seemed like deliberate deception to hide just how bad his financial situation really was.
So it goes way beyond just being in debt. We're talking about potential fraud, a willingness to actually break the law just to get money.
Exactly.
I mean, does this suggest that he was, I don't know, maybe kind of ruthless or at least didn't really care about the consequences of his actions?
I think it definitely makes you question his character and whether he was capable of deception. But, we're trying to figure out what happened that night, right? So let's look at how Mark acted immediately after the attack.
Right, because how someone reacts in a crisis like that can be really telling. Witnesses said that Mark was surprisingly calm and collected after the attack, almost like he was detached or something, more worried about getting his story straight than he was about Donna.
Yeah, think about the trauma of seeing someone you love get attacked like that. Most people would be hysterical, just overwhelmed with grief and shock, right? But Mark's composure just seemed really strange considering what he claimed he had just gone through.
Yeah, it's almost like it was too calm, given the situation. And that definitely caught the attention of the investigators. Oh, and then there's the whole thing with the other woman.
Ah, yes, the
Yeah.
other woman. So investigators found out that Mark had actually been having an affair in the months leading up to the attack. And it seems like he was actually making plans to leave Donna.
So we've got financial pressure, maybe he wanted a fresh start, and now we've got a potential love triangle.
It's getting complicated.
Things are definitely getting more complicated. But how does all of this connect back to that surprise witness that we talked about?
Well, this is where it all starts to come together. Remember that bombshell witness? The one whose testimony completely blew the case wide open.
Yeah.
Well, that witness was actually Mark's girlfriend.
Wow, talk about betrayal. So it wasn't just some random person coming forward with extra information. This was someone from Mark's inner circle, someone he trusted. So what was it that she revealed that was so damaging?
Well, according to her, Mark actually told her about his plan to get rid of Donna. He had even talked about the specifics, like how he was going to stage a home invasion, make it look like self-defense. He even talked about using Roger Harrington as the fall guy, because Harrington had a history of mental health issues.
So now we've got not only a possible motive, but also premeditation, a carefully planned out scheme. This isn't some crime of passion. This is cold and calculated.
Exactly. And her testimony went even further than that. She claimed that Mark had actually asked her to help him create an alibi, which makes him even more involved in the plot.
Wow, if that's true, it just paints this really chilling picture of manipulation and just straight up deceit. But why would she, someone who was allegedly part of this plan, turn against him?
Well, she said that she started having second thoughts, Like she really started to understand how ruthless Mark was. And she got scared.
Makes sense.
She also thought that he might try to frame her for the crimes, so she decided to go to the police before it's too late.
So she became a cooperating witness, a key piece of the puzzle for the prosecution. But how reliable was her testimony, really? Could she have been motivated by revenge? Or maybe just wanting to protect herself?
And that's exactly the argument that the defense was going to use during the trial. They tried to discredit her, make the jury think she was just a scorned woman who wanted to get back at her ex.
Yeah, that's a pretty common defense tactic, right? Try to create doubt, make the jury question whether the witness is telling the truth.
Yeah.
But did it work? Was her testimony strong enough to convince the jury that Mark was guilty? We left off with Mark Winger on trial, accused of, this awful plot to murder his wife and frame an innocent man.
Yeah.
And the prosecution seemed to have a pretty solid case, right? They had this motive based on all those money problems in the affair, plus the girlfriend's testimony was pretty damning.
Right. It seemed like it was all adding up.
But would it be enough for a conviction?
Well, the courtroom basically became this battleground between these two totally different stories.
Mm-hmm.
The prosecution presented this case built on all this circumstantial evidence.
Mm-hmm.
They were trying to connect the dots between his actions, the financial troubles, the other woman.
Mm-hmm.
They argued that his calmness after the attack, the way he tried to control what people were saying, all those inconsistencies in his story, they said it all pointed to him being guilty.
But the defense wasn't just giving up, were they?
Oh no, they definitely fought back.
Yeah.
They tried to say that the girlfriend's testimony wasn't reliable.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe she was out for revenge or just trying to save herself.
Yeah.
And they kept saying there was no smoking gun, no hard proof that actually tied Mark to the murders.
So it really became like a he said, she said kind of situation.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where you can see how tricky the legal system can be.
Yeah.
The jury had to take all this information, decide who they believed, and then figure out if the prosecution had actually proved their case, like beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right, right, because it's all on the prosecution to prove it.
Exactly. And even if their story makes sense, getting a guilty verdict isn't always easy.
And then Mark Winger didn't even testify in his own defense.
Yeah, that's interesting.
What does that even mean, like legally? Do people see that as him admitting he's guilty? Or is it just him using his right to stay quiet?
That's something people debate all the time. You know, legal experts, even people just watching the case.
Yeah.
Some say that staying silent makes you look guilty. Like if you're innocent, why wouldn't you speak up?
Right.
Others think it was a strategic move by his lawyers. Maybe they didn't want him to have to answer tough questions.
Makes sense.
But either way, it's a gamble.
Totally. If you testify, people really scrutinize everything you say. But if you stay quiet, they wonder what you're hiding.
Exactly.
And in Mark Winger's case, that gamble didn't work out.
No, it didn't. After weeks of going over everything, the jury came back with their decision. Guilty on all charges.
Wow.
Mark Winger got a life sentence. No chance of parole.
So the law considered that justice, at least.
Yeah.
But even with him being found guilty, there are still all these unanswered questions, this feeling that something is not quite right.
Yeah, there is.
I mean, Mark's always said he's innocent, kept filing appeals, saying he was wrongly convicted.
And that's what's so complicated about criminal justice. It's not always about being 100% sure. It's about looking at the evidence, considering all the arguments, and making the best decision you can.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, the jury decided that the prosecution's story made more sense, that their evidence was stronger.
So what are we supposed to take away from all this? I mean, there are just so many layers of lies, so many things we still don't know.
Well, I think the Winger case really shows how fragile the truth can be and how powerful people's perceptions are. Mark Winger built this image of himself, the heartbroken husband, the protector, the victim.
Right.
But underneath it all, there was this much darker reality, desperation, ambition, maybe even a complete lack of empathy.
It's like you can never really know what someone's capable of, even someone close to you. And sometimes the worst things happen in these seemingly normal places, not just in some dark alley.
It's true. And I think it also reminds us how important it is to think critically, to question what we believe, really look at the evidence, and consider all the different perspectives.
Yeah, totally.
The Winger case is like this puzzle with a bunch of missing pieces, and even though the courts made their decision, it's up to us to keep thinking about it, to try and understand why it happened, to face the fact that sometimes even the people we think we know can do terrible things.